We've probably got time for 5 more quick questions to respect the timeframes we planned for tonight. We've got 3 ready to go. I'm really keen to hear from any lefties, or if you just strongly disagree and you want to put an alternate view, the last thing we want to live in is a right echo chamber as a solution for the left echo chamber. We want to hear when we're wrong. So if you think we're wrong, come up and tell us why. Thank you.
Oh, g'day. I write as Moses Apostaticus for XYZ, so I'm a big fan of your work. My question is a bit more of a philosophical one. As a former libertarian, I've noticed a trend where the enemies that we're up against, and I would characterise them as the cultural Marxists inside our nations, and the, let's say, Islamists and be generous outside our nation, certainly Salafi forms of Islam like Wahhabism, they use our universalism against us. That we have this universalism which comes from the Enlightenment of human rights and equality, and then we've even got economic equality with socialism. And so we have these ideals which are universal, and it seems to me like our enemies are very good at using those against us. So I guess my question, and I mean it as a sincere question because it's something I've grappled with, how can we possibly maintain this universalist approach when the people who we're up against are very fiercely in-group preferring, they're very fiercely tribal, and they believe in what they're doing. When you look at, if you're willing to blow yourself up, I'm going to say something might be a little bit unpopular here, but I think it's very brave to go and blow yourself up in a marketplace for your beliefs. It's not cowardly. Like, these people believe fiercely in what they're doing. And my PhD's in education, and I'm very familiar with cultural Marxism. These people believe that they are bringing about utopia on the earth. It's a very powerful thing, and that's what motivates these groups. Now, I'm a Christian, and I wish that Christianity would come back and we'd find that, but I don't see that happening, to be frank. So I guess my question is, if all we've got is Australian values, which themselves have changed so much over the decades. The Australian values of now, aren't they the left's agenda of 50 or 100 years ago? So are people going to die for that? How can we face these opponents who are so fiercely determined when all we've really got is universalism or that type of approach?
Thanks, Moses. Mark?
I don't think we can maintain the universalism, and what I mentioned earlier on in terms of the school radicals, the welfare system and the immigration program, I'm basically saying those things wouldn't be universal anymore as a practical solution. So, I think we need to go down the path of being realistic about winding back some of those provisions and attitudes. The other point I'd make, I don't think people blowing themselves up is brave. I think it's fanatical, and it's a reminder to us that fanaticism can be very dangerous, and it is counter to the values of enlightenment and civilization, because part of the enlightenment was the rational assessment of evidence, the rational assessment of what's happening in society, and a view that rationally we're all better off helping each other with the benefit of science and history and knowledge than going down the path of a fanatical religious agenda. So, I wouldn't give them any of the credit of bravery. And, in their own religion, let's be honest about it, they're killing themselves knowing they're not going to face consequences in this world that would be fairly harsh for what they're doing. So, yep. I think it's more fanaticism. That's how I'd term it.
I see your point. From our cultural perspective, to lay down your life for fighting for freedom, your nation, your mate beside you in the trenches, that might be the comparison you're making. I think they're deranged. I don't think they're in the right mind. I think they're actually mentally touched in not a good way. And I think it's a direct pathological result of a really, really bad ideology that's been taken to its fundamental, inevitable conclusion. I think nominal adherents to it form the majority of the peaceful people we know and love and work with and buy from and welcome into our nation. But and I don't even like the word extremism. I think it's fundamentally true to the nature of it, because it's really accurate imitation of the example that they've been set.
At our Reformation, we went back to our texts and we founded Protestantism. in their Reformation, they went back to their texts, and I would argue they came up with ISIS.
With regard to universalism, the philosophical answer, just to be brief because we've got to get through a couple, that is the problem. The universalism's a terrible idea. It's basically another word for relativism. No, not everything is true, not everything is good, not everything is helpful. We need to discriminate like we discriminate between junk food and health food. We have to discriminate between good ideas and bad ideas for the healthy diet of our nation.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mark, and good evening, David. My name's also David. I'm here from
Handsome
Lismore.
and intelligent.
Thank you. My question comes from a Christian perspective, part of a church in Lismore, and that notion of the silent majority. And what I see is that there's, I guess, a lot of awareness to a degree within the church that there's stuff going on out in our world, in our nation, that people are very concerned with, but they're not really sure maybe what the problem is, and then if they are aware of what the problem is, they're not knowing what they can do about it. And so I guess from both your perspectives, I'm interested to hear, I guess, how we can go about motivating and also mobilising this silent majority, particularly in the context of church, to make a real difference, I guess, beyond the keyboard or the Facebook.
Yeah, great question.
That we're all fairly familiar with.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, David. Mark?
We'll start with your church. I think the churches have gone too quiet on pushing back against some of these changes. Safe schools, for instance, is an abomination in terms of church and other teachings, and the church, I would have hoped, would be more active in opposing that program and the sister program, Respectful Relationships. It should be against any form of cultural Marxism in our schools. And also, I fear that the church has been quiet and maybe intimidated by some of the tactics in the debate about gay marriage. So another example of where they could play a bigger role. I mean, it's all hands on deck. We are in a culture war. There's been a march through our institutions to fundamentally change Australian values and attitudes, and we've all got to push back against this. I say this as someone, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a member of a church, but I recognise the values of the church as a civilising force in our society, and I would hope that the church would be more active instead of becoming part of a silent majority. You know, the church is too silent on these things and needs to make a stand.
Yeah, awesome.
The country needs to be re-evangelised. Speaking as an atheist, the country needs to be re-evangelised.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Sorry, what was
I
your
can
name
relate
again?
to that.
Sorry, Chris, just for the benefit of the recording, Chris said, as an atheist, he thinks the country needs to be re-evangelised. Look, from a Christian perspective, the reason I'm doing the show is because I want to be part of the solution. We are part of the silent majority, and whether you believe in the Bible or not, they are the values that form a civil society. They are the values that form the foundation of our nation. And they are the values that have prospered us and helped us grow and helped us be inclusive, secular, pluralistic democracy. You don't have to believe in the Bible to come to Australia and enjoy all the benefits of the biblical foundation of Australia. You don't have to believe in the Bible or Jesus or God or any religion at all to be a welcome, valid, equal part of Australia. And those values are the same ones that will continue to make us successful in the future, regardless of your worldview. It's that law and order, it's that respect and equal dignity for every person that's with us. The practical solution is more information, and alternate media is obviously what I see as part of the solution to that. So opening our eyes up to hearing what the guests on Mark Latham's Outsiders have to say. What are they saying that we've never considered before? And giving it full scrutiny. Are they right or are they wrong? Cassie J, Bettina Arndt, you know, there's really good opinions out there, and nobody's got 100% of the truth. But we can go on this journey for truth together. But it first of all just needs to be, okay, well, let's start opening our information diet beyond mainstream media. Let's open up to alternate media, and let's talk about it with our friends and refuse to be offended if they say something we disagree with.
Yeah, and getting stuck in and having a go, and sometimes little things can produce remarkable results. Look at Stuart's letter about Qantas. It provoked a great Australian like Margaret Court to have a go. She's got support, she's put the issue out there and created a pushback against Qantas we wouldn't have otherwise had. So even writing a letter can make a big difference. People have really got to get stuck in and have a go.
And that's the second part. We need to be better informed and we need to be better involved. So we, like everybody, even if you're a lefty, this is how, if you really believe that's the best idea to make Australia better, then do it. Fact is they do. And it's us on the right, the libertarians and the conservatives, who are just happy to watch politics. We need to be writing letters. We need to be talking to the people seeking election to represent us. And we need to be saying, hey, if you want to represent me, here's my values, have a crack. Are you going to vote my way or somebody else's? Because I want to vote for you if I can, but I won't if I can't.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Fourth last.
How are you guys? Big fan of you both. My question's mostly for Mark. Just wondering, what was your thought process in joining the Liberal Democrats, whether that's the most effective place for your voice? I mean, realistically, they're not going to govern the country, whereas, you know, it's always been, you know, Liberal or Labor for the last few decades. You know, maybe were you to join, for example, the Liberal Party, you know, pushing that towards a more logical way of thinking, wouldn't you have more effect there? Or are there not too many small parties already that push similar ideas, great ideas, but, you know, is the voice not being spread out too much?
Well, I think the Liberal Party's become a lot like the Labor Party under Malcolm Turnbull, quite frankly. I wouldn't be very comfortable with a party that produced that budget that's Labor light, and Turnbull cheers on a lot of the political correctness that I'm opposed to, so I wouldn't be comfortable with that. And I don't think it's right to join a party because you think that's the one that's most effective in possibly forming a government. I'm at a point in life where I'm interested in principles and ideals, and I thought the Liberal Democrats were the best reflection of what I believe in, especially with my recent experience. So I'm happy to support them and add to their effectiveness, because I think fundamentally for our democracy we need third-party alternatives, because Labor and Liberal have become so similar. We're almost like a one-party state now, which is not healthy in the democracy.
That's right.
So building up the alternatives is democratic, and if it's consistent with my principles, that's where I want to be.
So, I mean, to follow on from that, are there not, I mean, there's One Nation, there's Cory Bernardi's party, there's the Liberal Democrats, there's a lot of parties on the right. Don't you worry that splinters the vote a lot and dilutes the impact?
Well, maybe out of one of those parties there'll be one that emerges as the viable third-party alternative that shakes up the big two. And breaking that duopoly, I think, would be a great service to our democracy. So you've got to start somewhere.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
There was a time when Liberal and Labor didn't exist, or were pretty small, so they grew from something, and maybe the others can.
That's right.
Good evening. My name's Hilton Holder, and I only arrived 5 minutes ago. I had to attend to my daughter's formal, but I was just hoping to ask you this question. I saw the subject was the discussion of Christian ethics, and maybe as a basis for the political situation here. Now, I'm an atheist, not an anti-theist. I just don't regard the supernatural as being real.
Sure.
But from what I can see, all faiths, all religions, you pretty much fall into the religion by means of, or by virtue of an accident of the geographic location of your birth. Like, if you'd been born in Mecca, you'd be Muslim, and on the banks of the Ganges, you'd be Hindu, for example. And I'm just wondering as to, I mean, we currently have the situation, for example, where Islam wants to reinstate Sharia, which is just theocracy. Now, it seems like mankind has taken so long to break free from that kind of thing, and especially from, you know, with the separation of state and church. What I do see, however, though, is that the state and economics, that there has to be a separation between the state and economics, and for the same reason as the separation between state and church. And the reason I'm saying is exactly as Mr. Latham just said, that between the left, or Labor and Liberals, basically the Conservatives are not in opposition, they're fake. There's no fact behind it. Now, both of them are motivated, both sides of them, the politicians are motivated by the fact or by the ability to buy votes by means of raiding the public or the private property of its citizens. And I think both of them get away with it, and typically because of altruism or self-sacrifice for the sake of the needy, being a cultural value that has been appropriated over thousands of years of brainwashing. And even though it's absurd, I mean, there's no reason, no earthly reason why a person has to sacrifice his own private property for the sake of needy others. We still believe that morally it's a great value. And people, when called upon that, actually they want to get in first in the queue to be seen as doing good. So shouldn't we just revert to, I'd say, the ethical values that is proven time and time again, and which has been derived from the facts and the nature and the requirements of our existence? I'm talking about free markets and a constitutional republic where everyone's individual rights are enshrined by a constitution and a Bill of Rights, and get politicians out of people's private property, no matter from what behind what moral ammo it is being perpetrated.
Sounds like you're essentially arguing libertarianism.
No, I'm not, no.
What's the question?
Well, the question
Just
is why politicians are so hell-bent on keeping morality out of politics, you know?
Out of politics.
Yes, and obviously the reason is because if they had to bring in property rights and the sacredness of individual rights, then the whole game would collapse, because they can't buy votes with people's money anymore for the sake of redistributing it to the needy.
So the question is, why are politicians hell-bent on keeping morality out of politics?
Pretty much. And also the other question is why even something like theocracy or using Christian ethics, for example, in the political landscape, why is this being discussed when we've already gotten rid of that 80 years ago or even longer?
You mean separation of church and
state? With the
state?
separation of state and church.
Okay, I'll answer the second part. You answer the first part, Mark?
Well, I think the whole culture war battle is a contest of morality. So I don't think politics is devoid of morality. In fact, I think it's overflowing with it at the current time. And I don't support the morality of the cultural Marxism that they're pushing. So I think that's apparent, and I disagree with the basis of your question in that regard. In terms of church and state, my contribution would be to say that church has a lot to offer in terms of its ethical framework, and society in many ways, the system of government, can always benefit from good ethics. You know, I'm not a Christian, but I tell my children, for instance, that they should read the Bible to understand the moral teachings of Christ, because he existed as an historical figure, as a human being, and whether or not he was the Son of God, he was certainly the greatest moral teacher in history, who had the most lasting moral impact on society. And his message through time has prevailed, and needs to be understood in its historical context, but also its contemporary relevance. So I think all parts of society have got a contribution to make to our democracy, and you shouldn't rule the church out as an institution. Other institutions get to have their say, and if the church is based on good morality, which it tends to be, then it should have a valid say.
So my explanation of the separation of church and state, which is section 116 of our Constitution, is that Australia is endeavouring to be a pluralistic, inclusive, secular democracy. And what that basically means is no preference for any denomination. Believe what you want, you still only get one vote. It also is intended to protect religious organisations from government interference, which is essentially free speech. You don't get to tell me what to believe. You don't get to tell me what not to believe. But as far as separation of church and state goes, it was never intended to protect the government from religious opinions. One person, one vote, majority rules. Regardless of whether you're an atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, labour unionist, environmentalist, whatever your worldview is, we have a free debate about it, contest of ideas. May the best idea win. Whoever persuades the most people that they're right, they will win. So Christian ethics are only argued by Christians. So if we're the majority, then we win. If we're in China, then we lose. That's not that China's a democracy, that's just outlawed altogether. That's what happens when you don't separate church and state. When you let the government dictate beliefs, you get fascist, communist dictatorships where only approved ideas are allowed. So my argument with Islam, for example, as it has to do with separation of church and state, is let's debate it. If it's a fantastic ideology, persuade me. If it's not, then let's examine it, critique it with an even hand and an open mind, by the same standard we examine every other idea.
Could I follow up with another question?
No, I think you've had a pretty good go. For a latecomer, you came in with a big question. It was a very thoughtful contribution, but I think we've got to move on with
Good
the others.
question, thank you.
Yeah.
My first question is, joining class.
You want some more water? Yeah, it is a bit warm. Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
That's okay, but that wasn't my second. No, my real question.
You only get one question, sorry.
You're trying to soften us up, aren't you?
Second last question.
So, Mark, you said earlier that the LDP is all about freedom. So my question is, I'd just like to know if the LDP has considered the issue of medical freedom, and are they planning to review their current position on it?
Medical freedom. This is
Yeah,
not
well-
vaccines, is it?
Well, my issue, yes, is vaccines. That's probably where I'm coming from in that question.
Yeah, well, back in the day when I sent my kids to preschool and childcare, I think they had the fundamental freedom to go there and not be infected with diseases that in the past have killed a lot of children. And I think vaccines in medical science have been an overwhelming force for good. It's obviously not compulsory to vaccinate your children. It's not the state-sanctioned activity where you're punished if you don't. But if you're mixing with other people's children, then I think there is a basic requirement through preschool and childcare to be vaccinated to preserve the free safety of others.
Is the removal of otherwise universal privileges and benefits not punitive?
Well, you've still got the free choice not to vaccinate your children, but you won't be allowed to go to places where you could potentially infect them with diseases that medical science has conquered.
But isn't that like saying you've got the freedom to not go over the speed limit, but if you do, there's going to be consequences?
Well, the person that we have a speed limit to protect the freedom of other drivers to be safe and reasonable in their own driving habits. So freedom, libertarian thinking is often interpreted as one-dimensional. It's solely about one individual. But in a society, a thing called society, liberty has got to be two sides of a coin. It's the freedom not only of the individual to do certain things, in this case to choose not to vaccinate their children, but the freedom of people potentially affected by that child to have basic standards of safety and medical science protection for their children. And as a parent who's been through this, vaccinated my kids, I believe in vaccination, believe in medical science, I believe in eradicating diseases like polio and smallpox and the like. I just find it incomprehensible that we could have unvaccinated children in an environment that could harm others. It's just not going to happen.
Have you got a quick follow-up, Donna?
I do. Because there is actually plenty of scientific evidence about the vaccination on both sides of the coin. So it's, the government is actually saying that it's bad, but they're actually really not looking at the other side of, it's bad not to vaccinate. And there's two sides of that coin as well where people believe that. And so I homeschool, so it's not an issue to me, but if I decide to send my children to school, if my children in generations to come decide to send their children to school, then there could very well, if it just keeps going down that line, where there is discrimination, where we may not be able to do that.
Well, I'm not a doctor, but I do know before the invention of vaccines, hundreds of thousands of children around the world died of diseases we have now conquered. And that is overwhelmingly a good thing for our society, overwhelmingly. And we're going to preserve that, and we're going to keep the system we've got. because it's overwhelmingly in the interests of young people. And the idea that we could ever risk the reintroduction of those epidemic diseases into Australia is just abhorrent to me. Every instinct in my body as a parent is against that possibility.
This is a topic that could go on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
We're going to have probably 10 minutes with Mark, so not everybody's going to be able to go really well, but there will be an opportunity.
The good thing is, in our society, you've got the freedom to homeschool, and I respect that and would defend that. You've got the freedom not to vaccinate your children, but other parents have got the freedom to say, it's not going to happen at our expense.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Tony. But for concluding the main proceedings tonight, David.
David, good evening. I'll start with a quick statement. My view of government in Australia and around the world at the moment is it's going wrong because it oversteps on one of two main errors. The first is, on the Liberal side, government thinks they can take care of the individual, and on the left, they think that the individual doesn't matter and that the state matters. Both of those ignore what I would see as the fundamental building block of society, which is in fact the family.
Yeah.
To the extent that government can help anybody, they can help a family. Both sides of government currently overreach. They overreach and they deliver services that nobody fundamentally wants. A child will always want their mother or father looking after them, not a state-sanctioned, financed daycare centre. An old person will always want their children looking after them, not a state-sanctioned, financed nursing home. To the extent that government oversteps, they deliver poor services that they pay for, and they'll never be able to afford the sort of services that individuals want. On both sides, they make that error. Even on the vaccination debate, take it to the choice of the family. Once government decides individual health outcomes, yet again, they overstep a basic principle of the most fundamental building block. I'd be interested in your view on that, and where in Australia is a political party that takes care of a family. Not the state, not the individual, but a family.
Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. You don't hear politicians talking about the nuclear family anymore. It's become a bit unfashionable, but there's no doubt the nuclear family remains the most remarkably successful part of our society and our civilisation. Every day I'm thankful that I'm part of one, and I understand the wonders and the benefits of children growing up with both a mother and a father. Those vital dual role models are incredibly important. So we need to constantly remind ourselves of the importance of the nuclear family in the political debate, because it has been overlooked for a whole range of reasons, many of which we've touched on. But your point about community contribution and people helping each other is vital, because in so many areas where government comes in with provisions and relies on a corporatised model, a for-profit model, you get this unfortunate loss of community and voluntary contributions to the common good. And the most recent example is the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is a commendable objective to provide care packages, whole-of-life care packages for disabled Australians. But we read just in the last couple of weeks where some of the money is now being used for scores of lawn mowing companies to come in and do the gardening for disabled people, work that previously would have been done by their family, neighbours, church, community, charities, person up the road, would have helped with something as basic as mowing the lawn. Is that the best use of taxpayer funding for disabled people, lawn mowing? Of course it's not. So where government comes in with these corporate models, it squeezes out and diminishes community and voluntary effort, and that can weaken families, but I think it weakens the effectiveness of government itself. So I'm opposed to the corporatised model in many of the areas you mentioned. You need to support families and individuals with whatever entitlements government provides, so you're bringing out voluntary and community effort as well as the public resources to try and help people. That's my view.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. It's been fantastic to see a good turnout. I applaud you for coming out on a Saturday night to talk about politics. It's that kind of interest that will make the difference in our nation. People willing to engage in the conversations, people willing to encounter different ideas. And thank you very much, Mark Latham, for doing your show and for increasing the conversation that we're having in Australia about different issues. And I'm very, very happy that you've got that partnership with Rebel
thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the audience. And politics is a dirty word. I think rather than talking politics, and we've been talking about a better society, a better country, which is what I think the conversation's been about. And thank you very much for having me.